And we're live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another rousing edition of Self Publishing Insiders. I'm Jim Azevedo, and I'm the Corporate Communications Manager at Draft Digital. And today it is our distinct pleasure to welcome best-selling author Paul Austin Ardoin. Paul, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for having me. It's really great to be here. Appreciate the time.
Oh, we're excited to be here for a couple of reasons, and the first reason is that I want to talk about a little bit about your mysteries. So Paul is a best-selling author of two mystery series, the Fenway Stevenson mysteries, of which there are 10 books now. Paul, is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, and then the Woodhead and Becker mysteries, and you've got two books there as well,
Right.
correct?
Right.
Okay.
And I just finished the first draft of the third one.
Did you? All
I
right.
did. Yep. Just this weekend.
All right. Well, that's exciting. But the real reason we're here today is that we're going to talk about Paul's latest book and your first nonfiction book, From Zero to Four Figures, making $1,000 a month self-publishing fiction. Now, this came out just about a week ago? Is that right?
Yeah, on the 13th of June. Yeah. So, yeah, just a couple weeks ago.
Okay. Well, congratulations with
Yeah.
that, getting that book out there. What I
Thank you very
normally do,
much.
Paul. Well, thank you for writing it and being here. What I normally do, Paul, before I really want to hop into this book because I think the organization of the book and the material is just fantastic. But what I typically do is I want to give a little bit of foundation to our discussion here, a little bit of background for our viewers to talk a little bit about you and how you got started. Because from what I understand, you were an aspiring novelist, an aspiring best-selling novelist at 6 years old.
Well, nobody wants to be an aspiring failed novelist, right?
Oh,
But yes, ever since I was 6 years old, I have really thought of myself as a novelist, and the book gets into a little bit about how I had those dreams. I said, oh, I'm going to write a 12-book series about this, and I would hand draw all the covers and things like that. I majored in creative writing at
wow.
university. And then, life got in the way. The university creative writing program really focused on literary fiction. And one day I woke up and I was pushing 40 and I had yet to write my novel. And,
Ah,
it's hard to call yourself a novelist when you haven't finished a novel yet.
yeah.
So I kind of rededicated myself to becoming a novelist.
Yep.
And it took me 8 years to write that first Fenway Stevenson
Yeah.
novel, and a lot of help from NaNoWriMo to get
Yeah.
that
Good.
done. I talk in the book a little bit about how I had a Facebook post that I was like, I'm going to do NaNoWriMo this year, and I wrote one chapter and that was it. And then 7 years later, Facebook is like, hey, Paul, do you remember that on this day 7 years ago, you said you were going to write a novel? And I was like, oh,
Oh
thanks,
no.
Facebook, for reminding me of my failed dreams.
Right.
Um, but but it was actually that terrible reminder when I was like, I really have to do it this time.
Yeah.
And I made a promise to myself. I said, what's going to be different this time? Because I've
Yeah.
started novels and haven't finished them for 20 years. And well, even when I was 6 years old, was
Yeah.
writing novels and not finishing them. So what would I do differently this time? And it was a promise that I made to myself that I would actually finish the novel no matter what. Like, even if I got halfway into it and I was like, this is terrible, nobody's ever going to read this, I should give up. I wouldn't give up. I would just finish it because that's what my goal was, to finish this novel. So that's what I did. I talk about how I got 2/3 of the way through it, saw that I had a huge problem that ordinarily would have made me quit,
Mm.
but I persevered because I had made that promise to that little pesky 6-year-old kid inside of myself,
Yeah. A huge
about
problem with
that.
the book. A
So
huge problem with the book itself, with the manuscript itself. You mean?
right, yeah.
Okay.
So I talk about what that was, but in particular, it was
Okay.
because my protagonist, Fenway Stevenson, she was coming across as whiny. And I didn't think anybody would be on her side, much less be interested in reading about the murder she'd have to solve with this. I did find a way around it, as the book details. I finished it, and then I had to rewrite a very significant chunk of it. But it was very satisfying when I was done, because I mean, when I was done with that terrible first draft, I had never finished a novel before, so it was a great sense of accomplishment for that.
It's a huge accomplishment. Yep. Fantastic.
Yeah. But then the point of the book, though, is that, you know, we can all, many of us writers do have that huge accomplishment, because 99.9% of the world never finishes a novel, never finishes a book. But if we want to have a successful career, it's what do we do once we have finished that book? Do we put it in the bottom drawer and leave it there for 30 years? Or do we work to try to get it to be the best it can be in terms of attracting a readership? And what do we do once we want to sell it? And, you know, and that's where I was. I had a friend who had published sort of a memoir style book, and she was making good money from it. And she turned me on to some of the podcasts, like Joanna Penn's podcast, The Creative Pen, the Self-Publishing Formula, which became the Self-Publishing Show, and some of those. But a lot of the books that I was looking at were for people who were either much further along than I was, or that were specifically focusing on craft. And, you know, it's really overwhelming to be like, okay, I have this book. What do I want to do with it? Maybe I want to sell it. And everything out there be like, here's how you can get to 100,000 readers. Here's how you can buy your yacht. Here's how you can buy a Caribbean island. When really,
so overwhelming.
Like, yeah. And how do I get people who are more than just my friends and family and coworkers to buy the book? So if this is you, or if you know somebody who is in that boat, this is the audience that I wrote this book for. Because that's where I was at the beginning of my author journey. And if I had somebody to tell me some of the things that I'm talking about in this book, I think I would have been a lot better off. And I also talk about all the mistakes that I made as well, because I made a ton of mistakes when I was not only writing the Fenway Stevenson mysteries, but when I was trying to expand beyond the Fenway Stevenson mysteries and see, maybe there's another series of books here that I can write. Maybe there's a spin-off book I can write about this. I talk about all the mistakes that I made.
Sure, and I think that's great, and it's quite generous of you too, because when we get started on our author careers, we just don't know what we don't know. So one of the best ways to learn is by making those mistakes. But thankfully, you came along and said, "Hey, here's all the mistakes that I made. I want to share these with you so you don't step in those same potholes that I stepped in." You know, there's a lot to unpack with this book, and I want our viewers to know that the organization of the book is phenomenal. It's really good. And Paul, if you'll bear with me, I want to unpack. I want to let folks know that it's organized in 3 sections, but right off the bat, in the introduction, I think it's the second sentence in your introduction, you state, I've got 2 goals for you. The first goal is to help you get to $1,000 in profit, right? In profit a month by selling your books. And the second goal is how to set up your approach to book writing for success that will last you throughout your career. So there's nothing about, hey, we're going to do this thing and you're going to make $1,000 a month and that's it. Like, these are evergreen best practices that you can use throughout your career. Now,
yes,
the book is organized in 3 sections. It is satisfying books is section number 1. Section number 2 is effective marketing. And then section number 3 is putting it all together. So you're putting all of what you've talked about in the first 2 chapters together so that authors can take what they've learned from you, put together a plan, and execute on that plan, and even break it down per month. But with that first section, the satisfying books, can you start to dive into that, Paul, a bit, and tell us exactly what do you mean by satisfying books?
There are a lot of books that aspiring authors have seen and read
Hmm.
that don't seem like what their English teachers would call good books.
Yeah.
There are a lot of authors out there that have had major success, and you might read it as a reader and go, "This is terrible." There's the characterizations terrible. There are a couple of self-published authors I have read who are quite successful, who have grammatical errors throughout their book, and you would think that those would not be successful. But what all of these books have in common is that they are satisfying their readers enough so that they're buying the next book in the series, or usually the next book in the series, or that they're telling their friends, "Hey, this is a really good book. You should buy it." So what our English teachers told us, what our creative writing professors have
Hmm.
told us in terms of how we should write, doesn't always match up with what is going to satisfy the person who picks up your book. And it's also not going to overlap with what actually people will pay money for when they buy.
Hmm.
And I go through that a little bit, what people need in order to create satisfying books. Um, it's it's something about their characterization. It's something
Sure.
about the plot, and when and it has to do a lot with the expectations of the genre that you're writing in.
Okay.
So many times, creative writing professors talk about literary fiction, and literary fiction is notoriously a little thin when it comes to plot, very heavy on characterization. And for people who like literary fiction, those are the expectations of that genre. But if
Okay.
you're writing something else, sci-fi, fantasy, romance, mystery, um, even memoir, or narrative nonfiction, there are beats in the story, there are tropes, and there are characterizations that people who like these kinds of stories and will buy them and follow you from series to series or from book to book
Hmm.
as an author, they're things that they expect. And meeting those expectations and putting just enough of a twist on their expectation so that it's surprising yet not so far outside where they're like, wait a second, where did that come from?
Yeah.
That's the key to writing satisfying books. Now, I'm not suggesting that you litter uh, your book with grammatical errors or anything like that. I think those people are successful in spite
Sure.
of that, because I also talk about you needing to make sure that your book is indistinguishable from a big five publishing house book if you're self-publishing.
Absolutely,
Uh,
that's some of the
you,
advice we gave as well. It's like, hey, if you're self-publishing, you need to understand that you are, in a sense, becoming a publisher. Your book has to be just as good, if not better than some of those books that are coming out of New York.
right. And I talk about my failure with this too. I had my second series, the Woodhead and Becker series. It was called Murders of Substance, and I had this idea. I'm a kid of the '80s. I grew up listening to a lot of electronic bands in the early '80s. There's this band called New Order, which a lot of people have heard about. They produced some of the most influential dance tracks and music in the early 1980s. They've got this compilation album called Substance,
Okay.
and so Murders of Substance. It's this FBI style agency that focuses on poisoning murders,
Ah,
and all the characters are named after band members of New Order. And I named the first couple of books after the first two tracks on Substance. And I thought
love
I
it.
was being like super clever. And yeah, well, the authors that I talk to absolutely love it. I talked uh, in one podcast interview, I had this idea, and I was telling the interviewer about it. He's like, "Oh, you got to give this to me because I love
Mhm.
New Order." Well, turns out that I wasn't actually meeting my audience's expectations. I mean,
Ah,
a lot of my audience was alive in the 1980s, but even if they were listening to New Order, what does that have to do with a hard-boiled murder mystery?
yeah. Okay.
They weren't getting the inside jokes. Even if they got them, they were like, "Yeah, okay. What does that do for me? I'm looking to read a novel here
Yep.
that has these beats for a hard-boiled murder mystery."
Mhm.
I mean, sure, it's it's kind of funny that you've got, so New Order, ha ha ha. But let's get to the meat and potatoes of the book, and give me a satisfying murder mystery. And I had forgotten that now the I think anyway, and my reviews will probably back me up on this. Those were satisfying murder mysteries, but my marketing was terrible.
Ah,
It duplicated the New Order substance cover, which looks like a nonfiction book and doesn't look like a murder mystery. And even when I had it redesigned, there was a syringe that was the murder weapon
hmm.
in book one, and there was a gas mask features prominently in book two. So I had a syringe and a gas mask on the covers. Well, those look like fiction, at least they didn't look like nonfiction, but they also look like post-apocalyptic thrillers,
Ah,
not like hard-boiled murder mysteries. So I was just, and even with the Fenway Stevenson mysteries that I had been producing for 2 or 3 years, where I had been meeting those audience expectations with my Woodhead and Becker series, everything I did was just off. My readers expected a mystery. I was giving them something that looked like a nonfiction book.
got you.
Then I was giving them something that looked like a post-apocalyptic thriller, and that's just not a recipe for getting to $1,000 a month with your writing.
True. Wow. So did you change that cover twice? Did I hear that correctly for the Woodhead and
Not
Becker
only
mysteries?
not only did I change the cover twice, I wound up changing the book titles, and I wound up changing the whole name of the series. So it used to be Murders of Substance, um, and I abandoned the whole cheeky New Order thing, and it's now called the Woodhead and Becker Mysteries, because looking at all of the successful murder mysteries out there, they're either named after the sleuths or they're named after the location. There are
Okay.
very few of them that are named anything else. So my Fenway Stevenson mysteries are named after the sleuth. There are a lot especially in the cozy world, there are a lot of ones that are like the Florida Keys mysteries or
Yep.
something like that. And those can be successful. So the Woodhead and Becker series is what I renamed it. And I renamed the books the something murder. So the first one is the Winterstone murder. The second one is the Bridegroom murder. The third one that I just wrote finalized um,
Hmm.
the first draft of is called the Trailer Park Murder.
Okay.
So much more in tune with, hey, this is a hard-boiled mystery. I want my readers to know what they're going to get when they pick up the book, when they look at the cover, and when they read the blurb,
Okay.
because those are the three things that are going to really determine whether or not they click on that buy now or download now button, and whether they go on to something else.
Yeah. There's
Um, you know,
two really key points here I want to chime in on, and that is you went from a cover image that people didn't really have any clue about what the book was, if it was nonfiction or even fiction. So you redid that completely. You set their expectations. You gave them a promise with that book cover image and book description, so they knew exactly what they were getting. Um, but something else I want to key in on here is that I think for a lot of newer authors, it takes us forever to get a book out because we think, well, gosh, if I go ahead and publish this book and it fails, it's career over. I blew it. That was my one chance. Oh my gosh, it's over. But you're telling folks like, hey, no, it's not. You're a self-published author, and one of your key advantages to being a self-published author is control, because as a self-published author, you're retaining 100% creative control. That means if you put your book out into the market and it's not flying off those store shelves as quickly as you thought it would, it's not game over. Your book isn't just some static object that's collecting dust in the corner of a brick and mortar bookstore somewhere. You can, as Paul mentioned, you can change the cover image. You can rewrite that book's description. You can rewrite the manuscript itself and put out a newer edition to match those reader expectations.
and that's one of the great things about being a self-published author. And I have a chapter actually about why I chose self-publishing over the traditional querying
Hmm.
methods, and this has a lot to do with it as well. The the tools that we use, and Drafted Digital's tools are part of this.
Mm-hmm.
It is super easy to change your cover image. It is super easy to change your blurb.
Yeah.
If you've miscategorized your books because you thought it was a romance and it turns out to be a romantic suspense novel
Uh-huh.
instead, you can go in and change your BISAC categories.
Right.
It's fantastic, and the tools that Drafted Digital and some of the direct sellers give you, it's very easy to do that. It's a lot easier than going to a traditional publisher and convincing them to change a typo in your book. Never mind, the name of the series, for example. It's not, it's not a necessarily an easy thing to do, or a not time consuming thing to do,
Sure.
because going through that process was painful. But those tools that Drafted Digital and other vendors offer make it A, possible, and B, a lot easier than it would be otherwise.
Well, thank you, Paul. I appreciate you mentioning that. And it is true, the tools are getting better, they're getting easier to use, and they're getting faster as well. Can you talk a little bit about the cost of running your author business in conjunction with getting your manuscript ready to publish? Because I think some authors out there um, might have this preconceived notion that it costs thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, and other authors are getting, let's say, I don't want to say attacked, but let's say they're getting approached by companies that are a bit more on the scammy side, who are making these false promises of, turning their books, guaranteeing that their books are going to become bestsellers, or introducing them to Hollywood executives and that sort of thing. So can you put some realistic expectations out there for our viewers on how much they're looking to spend, and where they should spend, and maybe where they can kind of pull back a little bit on that?
Yeah, and certainly for my first novel, so I have a couple of chapters on this in the book, and I have a whole section of areas where I didn't spend the money that I recommend that we spend, and I kind of paid for it because of that.
Hmm.
Once you have your novel in a form, you've self-edited it, and you're like, okay, I'm ready for other people to look at this now.
Yep.
I really recommend that you go through an editing process for usually with 3 editors, a developmental editor, a line copy editor, and a proofreader. Now, they can be expensive, especially if they've got New York Times best-selling authors under their belt. But there also are people you can find who are just starting out. Maybe they're on their 3rd or 4th book, and they're charging half a cent a word
Okay.
instead of 2 cents a word like the New York Times ones are. Now, I skimped a little bit on this. I combined the developmental and the line copy editor in my first
Okay.
version, and I also picked an editor who was not really a mystery editor. And I wound up having to go through a different editor to do this. But it was a lot better than if I had not done it at all.
Hmm.
You also have to find a cover designer or a pre-made cover that works for your book and is in genre and will match those readers' expectations.
Okay.
Um, so so that's important, and that will cost money as well.
Okay.
Now, you can get pre-mades for $79 and $99, and if you can find one that works, that's great. You can find editors who are more expensive or less expensive. And there are ways, and I actually have a whole chapter in the book. If you don't have any money at all, if you don't have $200 to spend on an editor or a cover designer, how can you do this on either a shoestring budget or a no string budget?
Right.
Um, and you'll have to make some sacrifices in this. There are a lot of times when you really need a professional to look at it, and there are some authors who are definitely the exception, who can self-edit their own work to a level of professionalism that is acceptable, or who can design their own
Okay.
covers, again, to a level that's acceptable. But 99% of authors out there can't do either of those things, and shouldn't try.
Yeah.
So
Completely agree.
I go through the things you should look for in an editor that you should work with, that you should look for in a cover designer or a cover design, um, and and so the readers will get the benefit of my experience with that.
Okay. Yeah, it kind of goes back to setting those reader expectations. You mentioned when you go to find a developmental editor and a book cover designer, try to find those designers, those book cover designers, and an editor who is intimately familiar with your genre, because they're going to be able to catch things that your readers are expecting, that your readers are looking for.
Yeah.
Okay. Time's flying. And that was we got through some of the first section. There's a lot of information in your book, and I want to touch on everything. As I was going through your book, I'm highlighting stuff, and it was one of those situations where, like, I'm just going to bold the whole book or highlight the whole book here, because seriously, everybody, there's that much really good information that you can lock in on. But if you don't mind, Paul, let's move on to section 2. And section 2 of the book is effective marketing. One of your points in this section was to consider that first book as an entry point. You call it an entry, was that right? The entry point book? And
Entry
looking at
point
that
novel,
first,
yeah.
an entry point novel, and considering that book as an advertisement. But that book's my
Yeah.
baby, Paul. It's not an advertisement. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so it really is a big mind shift. I mean, when my first Fenway Stevenson novel took me 8 years to write, and so I wanted to make sure that everybody bought it at the highest price possible, and that I would rocket up the bestseller charts on the next Paula Hawkins.
Of course.
And obviously, that's not going to happen. That's not a realistic expectation for yourself as a writer. And so the thing you have to realize is that the first thing you want people to read out of the books that you have, whether you have 2 books published or 20 books published, uh, is that's the thing that's going to get them to read the rest of your books. And I draw an analogy to, you've been in Costco or a big box store or a grocery store,
Yep.
where they have food samples out, and hey, there's a pizza roll here, hey, there's a bagel bite, hey, there's a little shot of mango juice.
Yeah.
And there are people there who are giving this to you free. And the idea is you will love this so much that you go in and you buy that whole bag of pizza rolls, or you buy the whole bottle of mango juice.
Yep.
And thinking about your entry point novel, the first thing that you want people to read, as that little taste of your writing that will get people to buy the rest of your books. That's the mindset shift that I'm hoping people can get to this, because people don't really care that you've spent 8 years of your life writing that first book, and that you put blood, sweat, and tears, and anger and anguish, and all of that stuff in
a piece of your soul
into the right. And what they want to be entertained.
Right.
I also talk a lot about the process that book buyers go through when they don't have anything to read. And I think we've all been there, right? We get to, like, I know we all have a stack of books on our bedside table, but we look at those, we're like, I don't want to read any of those. But I don't have anything to read. What do I do? And so you'll go to a bookstore, or you'll look through your favorite book retailer's website, and you will start to search for what to read. And it's the book cover, and it's the blurb, and it's the and it's the book description, and maybe the look inside section, which will convince you that not only can I spend some money on this book, but also that I'm not going to waste 5 to 10 hours of my life on something that I want to throw across the room halfway through. And that is, a lot of people are like, well, a book doesn't, an ebook doesn't even cost as much as a coffee does. But the coffee is making a different promise, right? It's giving you a shot of energy. It's something that, it's quenching your thirst, or it's filling you up, or something. There's a promise that they're getting for that $5 cup of coffee.
Yep.
And they're not dedicating 5 to 10 hours of their undivided attention to the coffee. Right? It's not something that requires that requires a time investment from them. I mean, maybe if the line's really long at Starbucks, but other than that, it's not something they have to invest in. But a
Yeah, they're
book
not.
is something that people have to invest in, and they have to trust you as the writer that you're going to take them on a journey in that 5 to 10 hours that's going to be worthwhile and is going to make them feel better about themselves at the
Yeah,
end of that journey.
absolutely. And that trust begins at the very moment they first see your book cover image sitting on that virtual store shelf or on that brick and mortar a physical store shelf. You're guiding them
Right,
along and you're building that trust with them every step of the way. And if you're
right,
talented enough to hold their attention and interest and intrigue throughout the end of that book, chances are they're delighted that they've discovered you as a new author. So, do you recommend, Paul, at the end of your books, listing out also buys at the end of that book, or do you provide like a free chapter or just some kind of um, not necessarily a giveaway, but a taste of like say book 2 or book 3 to keep them on that train with you?
so in your entry point novel, I definitely recommend doing something like this. So not just on the next page,
Mm-hmm.
in fact, not on the next page, because so often, if you're reading on a Kindle or a Kobo e-reader or something like that, you will get, or your iPad app, you will get to the last page, and then the next page will not be the about the author or also by page. It will be, hey, did you enjoy this book? Rate it now, and here are other books you might like from the
Love it.
e-retailer where you bought that book. So on that page of your again of your entry point novel, right after the end of the book, it should say, if you enjoyed this book, here's the link to buy book 2 in the series, or buy the next, if you're a standalone author, buy the next book that you think will be the next, or read on for the first chapter in book 2, The Incumbent Coroner. And that's what I do with my book 1. I have the first couple of chapters of book 2
Mm-hmm.
immediately start after the end of book 1, so that and then at the end of those pages, which look like part of the book, which are not part of the end matter, then it says, want to read more, click here, and then they get a link to buy book 2.
Okay, perfect.
There
It
are a
sounds like.
lot there.
Go ahead, Paul. Sorry. I was going to say
So
that
I was going to
you're the
there
guest.
there are a lot of book marketing experts out there who
Yeah.
think that the reader magnet should be a short story or a novella or something unrelated, a side quest or something like that. And for certain genres, those can work. But in my experience, readers who buy novels, they don't really want short books. They don't really want short stories. They don't really want short side quests. They want full novels. And if you can give them, if that entry point novel to you isn't a 5-page reader magnet, but is instead a 250-page novel or a 350-page novel, depending on
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the genre you write in, I truly believe that's going to be the most effective thing you can do, is promoting that entry point novel, just like the sample pizza roll.
Okay, I'm going to bring up this comment, and I think you just answered it, so it seems appropriate. So Jennifer Perkins asks, and thanks Jennifer for the question, if you have a must-do for newer authors, what is the one thing you would tell us to start out with regarding marketing?
So for newer authors, I'm going to assume that you have one or two books out, and hopefully two books out, because it's difficult to promote one book and send your readers to nothing that you have, which is why why there's so big on reader magnets, I think. What I would do is I would sign up with a marketing company like BookFunnel or Story Origin, so you can still sell that book 1 on the e-retailers, but you can also give away that book 1 as a in exchange for an email address, a newsletter sign up, because your newsletter sign up, first of all, it's something that you own. You don't own Facebook, you don't own Twitter, you don't own Instagram, you don't own
Important.
TikTok. If those go away tomorrow, or if you're kicked off the platform and you're engaging with hundreds or thousands of readers on there, you've just lost the way to communicate with them. Figure out a way to get
100%.
those readers who might be interested in buying the stuff that you write, into your newsletter group, so that you own their contact information. You know how to reach them. So the first thing I would do is get something on BookFunnel or Story Origin. I'm signed up with both, but I started with BookFunnel first. And I went from having my mom and my cousin and her dog on my mailing list, to having 1,600 people on my mailing list in 6 weeks. And I only had 2 books out at the time. I had The Reluctant Coroner, which is my entry point novel, and book 2 in that series. And I got 1,600 people there, and people started to buy book 2 from that because they liked book 1. Now it's a lot easier to sell a series when you've got 3 plus, some people say 4 plus books
Yeah.
in your series, but there are still going to be the people who will follow you to that second book if you've only got 2 out.
Paul, for newer authors, let's say I'm an aspiring author and I've got my first book done and I'm really antsy to get it out there and released. Should I wait? Should I wait until I've got maybe 3 to 5 books ready to go? Or can I go ahead and put book 1 out there if I'm still working
I
on book 2?
I don't think there's any reason not to self-publish
Okay.
your debut novel. There many people have friends and family and coworkers um, and and other people in their lives who will be happy to support you and buy your book. Now,
Okay.
I knew maybe I had an opportunity to make it as an author when I had people, my friends and coworkers, say, I bought your book because I'm your friend or I'm your coworker, but I started reading it and it's actually good. And part of it is, are they insulting me by saying that they didn't think the book would be good? But I chose to say, well, no, they actually didn't think the book would be good, and I'm exceeding their expectations on this, and they might read my next book. The cousin and her dog, who I mentioned, were numbers 2 and 3 on my mailing list. She is one of my biggest fans. She
The cousin
buys
or the dog?
everything. Maybe both. But
Let's count.
definitely the cousin, yeah, is one of my biggest fans and tells her friends that they should read the Fenway Stevenson mysteries and everything like that.
Okay.
So there's no reason not to get that, but you don't want to promote your books until you have I would say 3 books out there. But I know the temptation to really
Sure.
start selling stuff. So if you have 2 books, you can, yeah, you're okay with just lower your expectations when you promote.
Right. Okay, I like that. I definitely want to get to section 3 of the book here, and gosh, it's going by so fast. I knew this was going to happen to us. But can you spend a minute talking about pricing, striking that strategy and balance as you're just beginning to get your books out there? Because you mentioned earlier that I don't know if it was what you were thinking about doing before you published, but I don't know if you actually priced higher with that first novel, with your very first novel, or you were just thinking about doing that. What do you suggest for newer authors when it comes to book pricing?
So if you have, there are a couple things. First of
Okay.
all, anything above in U.S. pricing, uh, anything at $2.99 or above is going to give you 65 or 70% of the sale, depending on the e-retailer. Um, and
You mean
anything
as
lower
your
than that will
royalty?
get you as your royalty, right? So you get about $2.04 from Amazon, for example. If you are lower than that, you get 35 or 40%, usually about 35% of that. So if you got a 99-cent book out there, you're only making 34 cents. So the difference between $2.04 and 34 cents, you have to sell 6 or 7 books at 99 cents to make the money that you would on one $2.99. So if you've only got 1 book out there, I don't really recommend selling it for 99 cents. If you have if you want people to go to your second and third book, maybe you can start talking about 99 cents then, because it's sort of like you want to get it in those people's hands so that they'll buy book two, and getting it in 6 times the number of readers' hands might be a better and more lucrative pricing option for you. Now, when I had 2 books out, I sold the first book for $2.99. I sold the second book for $4.99, and I put that $2.99 book. I was a wide author at the time, so I didn't have to deal with the KU rules and regulations. I had that $2.99 book that I gave away on BookFunnel and Story Origin in exchange for the email address, because it was worth it to me to be able to send an email out when I had the book 3 done, and when I had book 4 done, and book 5, and et cetera, and when I had my Woodhead and Becker series come out.
Okay.
So in terms of pricing, that's something that you have to take into consideration. But you also have to be open to experimentation, because even within genres and subgenres, there are going to be books that people will snap up at 99 cents that they will leave alone at $2.99, and vice versa.
And vice versa, yeah.
So there's, selling a book at $6.99 versus $4.99. There have been studies done a couple of years ago now that say there isn't a big drop in unit sales between $3.99 and $4.99, but there's a huge drop in unit sales between $4.99 and $6.99. So that's one of the reasons why I price at $4.99 instead of $3.99 or lower. But when you have a long series, you can afford to give that first book away. Free first in series, FFIS, is a marketing strategy that has been around for a very long time with indie authors. Now that I have, when I had 5 books in my series, that's what I started to use. And I saw that I could get those free books, that free sample at Costco of that pizza roll, out into literally thousands and thousands and thousands of readers' hands. And I determined that there was a significant percentage of those people just wanted the free book. But there was a good percentage of those people who not only bought book 2, but bought the rest of that series as well. And not only that, unlike Costco and your pizza roll, you're not paying every time your free book is distributed. There's no cost associated with that. You don't have to hire somebody to sit at a folding table in Costco and pay them $15 an hour to do that, and the microwave that they have to reheat the pizza rolls.
You're giving them a taste and pulling them in, letting them know what else is out there.
And you're doing it for really no cost to you. Now, if you advertise that, then that advertising has a cost associated with it. But again, it's negligible compared to what the pizza roll company needs to put together for that promotion at Costco.
Right. Okay. Let's shift gears. We got about 3 minutes left.
Okay.
The third section of the book, everybody, is called Putting It All Together. So we're taking everything that Paul has talked about here for the first 2 sections of the book, and the third section of the book is a plan and how you can execute all of this. He even breaks it down by the month. Now, what I love about your book, Paul, is that you're not talking about going from $0 to $1,000 a month in profit, and doing it within the next 2 weeks. You're telling folks, hey, I'm going to set your expectations realistically. This could take you a year. This could take you 2 years. This could take you 3 years because of several factors: your pace of writing, how many books that you're publishing, and so on. And the first chapter in that section of Putting It All Together is prioritizing. Can you talk a little bit about that in the last couple of minutes here? Like, how can you prioritize what you're doing from day in and day out as an author to help you achieve this level of success?
I mean, simply put, it's walking before you run, and staying within your budget. I'm not advocating that you spend thousands of dollars on ads that that aren't budgeted within your book sales. I'm talking about doing things like BookFunnel and Story Origin, and signing up for a mailing, an email service like MailerLite or MailChimp that doesn't cost anything when you don't have a whole lot of subscribers there. And then once you get to a place where you're starting to see your sales ramp up, then adding on to that with some inexpensive promos and then maybe some more expensive promos. And then after you do hit that $1,000 is when I think it's appropriate to start spending money on advertising. So the prioritization of that, and you've got to make sure that your books are meeting your readers' expectations first. That is your first priority for this, because I talk about this. You can market a bad book, but it's not going to sell. And there's nothing more frustrating than putting hundreds of dollars into a marketing campaign that doesn't move product because the product isn't good enough to meet consumer expectations on this.
Okay, I want to throw up a question here because I want to make sure that that we're clear here from RC. When we were talking about series starters and pricing series starters, his comment is that is a little circular. Is a loss leader at 0 or 99 cents or not? What do you think?
So every author's journey is going to be different. And I think you have to be open to experimentation on this. A lot of it depends on is genre dependent. A lot of it depends on within that genre what types of readers you get, what their what they look like, if they're younger or older, from what socioeconomic background, etc. I tried. I sold my first book at $2.99 for a very long time. For a while, I priced it at 99 cents, and I did not see the kind of movement that encouraged me to keep it at 99 cents. So I went back to $2.99. But then when I had 5 books in my series, I decided to drop it down to free and try promotions with that free first in series. And that wound up being very successful. Now, there are a lot of authors I have heard that say the free first in series does not work for them. Some of them are able to keep their first book at $2.99 and sell the rest of their series at $4.99 or even higher. And they're successful doing that. I don't think the Fenway Stevenson series would be successful doing that, but I'm not them, and that's perfectly fine. If this, and the last chapter I have in here is, make sure you're doing what works for you. Don't read this book and go, well, I've got something that works for me, but Paul says I should be doing this instead. Right. No, if it works for you, you might be the exception to the rule here, but there really aren't any rules. There are guidelines here, and there is really what has worked in my experience that I'm sharing in the book. And again, every author's journey is different. Every audience is going to be different. And my hard-boiled mystery audience is probably not going to look like your sci-fi audience or your YA fantasy audience or your romance audience.
Makes perfect sense. Paul, if folks want to reach out to you or find you online, is the best place to send them to your website or Facebook?
Yes,
or Twitter?
PaulAustinArdoin.com is the best place for that. Yep, right there.
Okay, just happen to have it ready. How about, can we send them also to Facebook and Twitter as well? Or is the website the best
sure.
place?
The website's the best place, and I have Facebook and Twitter links on there. Okay. My Twitter handle is Paul Ardoin, and my Facebook handle is Paul Ardoin Author.
Okay, there's Twitter, and here's Facebook. And folks, I want to remind you that this is what we were talking about today. We're coming up to our last few seconds here, but here's the book that we were talking about. Let me get rid of that. So this is what we were talking about today, From Zero to Four Figures by Paul Austin Ardoin. You can find it on Paul's website. And as we always do, we're going to end today with a quick little 30-second spot for D2D print. But before we do that, I want to remind you, if you would please like, share, comment, and subscribe. When you do these things, especially the sharing and the subscribing, it helps us reach more viewers, and it helps us to attract more awesome guests like Paul to the show here. Also, be sure to bookmark d2dlive.com, so each week you can be kept in the loop. You can be given a heads up of what topic and what guest will be coming up in the following week. And finally, if you are a newer author or an aspiring author who doesn't yet have an account at Draft2Digital, why not sign up today for your free account at draft2digital.com. To Paul, I want to thank you again for joining us here today. You had a ton of information that is so very, very useful. To our viewers, thank you all for being here. The show would not be possible without you. Be sure to go out and get Paul's book today, and stick around for the next 30 seconds as we show you our DDD print commercial, voiced by our own Kevin Tumlinson. Thanks, everybody. Be sure to hang out, Paul. See you in a bit. See you next week, everybody.
Ebooks are great, but there's just something about having your words in print. Something you can hold in your hands, put on a shelf, sign for a reader. That's why we created DDD Print, a print-on-demand service that was built for you. We have free, beautiful templates to give your book a pro look, and we can even convert your ebook cover into a full wraparound cover for print. So many options for you and your books. And you can get started right now at draftedigital.com.